After you've gone through a few iterations of the food you'll eventually want to sell on your food truck, you'll need to test them all in public. Just because you and your friends think your food tastes good doesn't necessarily mean strangers will also agree. Plus, people tend to be much more critical when they actually have to pay for their food rather than just tasting a few samples for free.
I'm debuting a spicy ranch spread.
I don't like this.
Fiesta flavor.
But it's free, so I will continue to chew.
Although testing your food is perhaps the most important step in building a successful food business, a lot of owners don't spend nearly enough time on this as they should. In my experience, these owners tend to have a highly inflated, almost delusional sense of confidence in their cooking abilities, and they mistakenly assume that customers will immediately fall in love with their food. It's kind of like how most people think that their driving skills are above average, even though this is mathematically impossible. Remember, food trucks and restaurants that spend months testing their menus still sometimes fail. So, what makes you think you can do a better job if you don't even bother testing for a few weeks?
He's got a point.
So before you plot down tens of thousands of dollars on a food truck, invest your time wisely by testing your food in public. During this process, you'll most likely receive some negative feedback, and the way you deal with it will be a huge indicator of how successful your business will be. Let's say you sell burgers made from grass-fed beef. A bunch of people try it, and the overall consensus is that the meat needs to be juicier. Which of the following do you think would be the best response? That's because grass-fed beef has less fat than grain-fed beef, so it may be a bit drier than you're used to. This is actually based on a traditional recipe that's supposed to balance out all the ingredients in the burger. Was the beef too well done, or was it just overall too dry? The correct answer is choice C. Notice how it's the only response that's a question. Notice how it's also the only response that tries to open up a conversation with the customer. You have to be open to hearing all different opinions, and then decide later which ones you'll listen to and which ones you'll ignore. Don't take anything personally. A lot of owners get very defensive and have an excuse or counter argument for every single thing a customer says.
That's impossible. That's impossible if a crab case is stone cold.
You telling me I'm exaggerating?
I don't know what he's talking about. Blah, 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 blah.
Let's look at why the other responses aren't so good, starting with response A. If you're not familiar with grass-fed beef, it's true that it's generally drier than grain-fed beef. But if a customer complains about it, do you think this kind of explanation is going to make them suddenly think that your burger tastes good? They don't care if it's grass-fed, or you sourced it from a local independent farm, or that you personally trimmed the beef, ground it, and molded the patties by hand. You're not listening.
Linda, listen.
This is a mistake that a lot of chefs make. They think explaining what the ingredients are, or how much effort goes into a dish, will make dissatisfied customers understand. But what customers really care about is how the food tastes. And in this case, your burger failed to meet their expectations. Now let's look at response B. This kind of response is pretty common when customers try a dish that's new to them because they don't know that the dish is supposed to taste that way. For example, if my food truck sold kimchi, which is Korean spicy pickled cabbage, people in the States who have never tried it before might be like,
Oh man, I'm gonna go for the this does no joke.
Even though people in Korea might be like,
아까 세상에서 제일 맛있었던 김치잖아요. 그거랑 비슷해요.
아, 그 정도예요?
그거랑 비슷해요.
최고의 국산 아닙니까, 이거?
김치 진짜 맛있다. 거짓말이 아니라.
so when customers here say that it's too spicy, I might feel frustrated because I'm over here making Michelin star-worthy kimchi, but these people who have no idea what they're talking about are complaining. The same thing applies to your burger. Maybe it really is difficult to taste the other ingredients in today's burgers because they're too fatty compared to traditional burgers, which is why you decided to make your beef patties the way they are. But if people continue to complain that it's too dry, you have to stop and ask yourself,
What is my purpose?
is it to have a food truck that tries to educate people about traditional burgers? Or is it to have a food truck that makes money? Remember how I told you in the previous chapter that our big chicken was a big flop? When we noticed that some of our regular customers ordered the big chicken once and then never again, we asked them why. They said,
It's so good.
but it's way too big and difficult to eat. These people wanted lunch that was convenient to eat, not something that required a fork and knife. At this point, we had a decision to make. Keep the big chicken as is, which is how it's done in Taiwan, or listen to our customers and try to make it easier to eat. So we played around with a couple of ideas, did a bunch of testing, and that's how the greatest chicken sandwich in the world was born. And to this day, it sells out every day. Take that, Popeyes. At this point, you might be thinking, can I really call this dish jerk chicken or this dish pad thai if I don't use the same recipes and ingredients from that country? Of course you can, as long as the main part of each dish is similar to what you'd expect to find in the native country. I love New York style pizza. I also love Chicago-style deep dish pizza. Are you going to tell me that they shouldn't be called pizza because they're not Neapolitan style? Stop worrying so much about being traditional or authentic. Instead, focus on what your customers want and listen to what they tell you. Now, this doesn't mean you should change your recipe every time someone gives you constructive criticism. Just focus on the majority. If the majority wants juicier burgers, figure out how to make your grass-fed burgers juicier. But if there's no majority and everyone is giving you all different kinds of advice, it may mean that your food just isn't very good. If so, go back to the drawing board. In terms of places to test your food, there are 3 options that I recommend. If possible, I highly recommend trying weekend markets, seasonal markets, flea markets, basically any place that allows you to set up a small stand or a tent and sell your food to strangers. Yumpling actually started in the Long Island City flea market, and the experience and feedback we got there were invaluable. In New York, Smorgasburg is one of the biggest and most popular outdoor markets. These markets are the best because, as I mentioned earlier in the course, the most reliable feedback comes from paying customers, not from friends and family. This will also force you to calculate your food margins, which I'll go into detail in the next chapter. Finally, these markets can act as a litmus test for how well your current menu would perform on your food truck, but without you having to risk tens of thousands of dollars. There are a few things you'll need to know and prepare beforehand. Number 1, depending on your needs, you'll need to invest at least $1,000, but more likely close to $3,000 or more to purchase tables, a tent, cooking equipment, and other supplies to set up your stand. Some of these may be used later on for your food truck, but for the most part, they'll only be useful in these markets. Number 2, in a major city, expect to pay $600 or more per weekend to rent a space. The more popular markets charge even more, sometimes close to $1,000 per weekend. If it's a well-known market, you'll have to join a long wait list of vendors desperate to get in. Depending on the market, you may not need to sign a long-term contract, so you can try it out for a weekend or 2 and decide what you want to do. Number 3, you'll need a large van or rental truck to transport your supplies to and from the market every day. A rental truck will cost you around $40 or more per day. Just be careful when you drive it around.
But I've never driven a truck before.
No problem. U-Haul lets anyone drive a giant truck, even though it's dangerous, because hey, you're moving.
Sorry.
Number 4, since you'll be a new face, prepare some samples of your food. If a lot of people take sample but don't buy anything, it could mean that your food isn't very good, your prices are too high, or they just want some free food. But this isn't always the case. Sometimes people will want to sample several foods before deciding where to spend their money. So don't be so discouraged and don't ever take it personally.
Oh my God, you have chocolate macadamia nut. Oh, could I just try a little sample? Oh, I'm so bad.
Sure. You gonna buy a cookie this time?
Oh, I better just stick with the sample. I'm so bad. But at least I know I'm bad, so that makes me a little less bad. Or worse.
If after a week or 2, people still aren't buying your food, ask for some feedback. You could even give some samples to other stands and ask what they think. Number 5, samples only work once people come to your stand. Therefore, you'll need to invest some time and money designing elements that'll attract customers from afar. Almost everyone will have beautiful signs and menu boards. You'll see really nice food displays and other knickknacks on tables. And some people just have really Instagrammable food. You might have tasted it and thought,
Dude, I don't get it. I don't get it either.
but a lot of customers are there mainly to take cool pictures to show off on social media. So basically, if you aren't selling a lot during your first few times, you may not know whether it's because your food sucks or because people aren't willing to give you a try. Number 6, in most markets, you can sell your food for more than you would be able to on a food truck. Customers expect to spend a lot of money at these places. Kind of like when you go to watch a baseball game and you spend $6 on a hot dog that would normally cost only $2 outside. The disadvantage is that you may not get a real sense of what people will be willing to pay for your food once you start your food truck, because food trucks are much more competitive on price. I once saw a stand at a weekend market that sold lemonade for $6 a cup. $6!
What?
And it wasn't even freshly squeezed or anything. They literally had a plastic jug full of water, some smaller bottles with lemonade flavoring, and cups full of ice. That's it.
That's crazy talk.
They were making a killing, but it was mainly because no other vendor there was allowed to sell drinks. I mean, they basically had a monopoly on people's thirst. I think they sold over 300 cups of lemonade that day. Now imagine you were the owner of that lemonade stand and you're raking in a couple $1,000s a day. So you decide it's time to open a lemonade truck selling artificially flavored lemonade for $6 a pop.
That is without a doubt the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
The point is, don't let any success at these markets get to your head. Your main goal is to see if people will buy your food, if you can get some repeat business, and if selling food is really the right thing for you to do. If you don't have any access to these markets, another good option is fundraisers, bake sales, religious functions, and any other event where you can sell your food. But instead of paying for a spot, you're required to donate a portion of your sales to a cause or to the organizers. You may still need to print a menu and purchase supplies, but you probably won't need to go all out with designing your tent, because your main goal there isn't to sell as much food as possible. It's to see if customers will buy your food and to get constructive criticism from them. A third option is potlucks, picnics, and other gatherings that involve lots of food and lots of people. They're free, you won't need to make any fancy signs or design a tent, and people rarely say no to free food, so you won't really have a shortage of customers. However, I would probably avoid being too aggressive in seeking out feedback in these settings, because if your food is good, people will definitely let you know.
How's the pie?
So good.
You don't want to come across as needy or make it awkward for people who dislike your food to say so. If people are going for seconds or thirds of your food, it's probably a good sign. I mean, unless all the other food there is bad. If your food is bad, people will leave most of it on their plates and throw it out. If they took only a small amount, they may finish it out of politeness, but they definitely won't be going for seconds. Finally, you can always ask friends, families, and coworkers to try your food.
Does it not taste good? Let me try it.
No. All gone. So good. Maybe Chandler has some left. It tastes like feet.
For you to get the most out of the experience though, you should try to gather a small group and serve them your food all at once. Food quality tends to fall when it has to be cooked in large quantities, so this will give you some practice with that aspect, and it'll help you see if certain dishes aren't really suited for cooking in a small space like a food truck. You'll quickly realize that any dish that requires many steps or has an intricate presentation won't work. You can also print a questionnaire for your guests to rate your food at the end of the meal. Make the questionnaires anonymous, so nobody will feel guilty telling you how they really feel.
So a bird just grabbed it and then tried to fly away with it and then just dropped it on the street?
I actually created the questionnaire that we used at a few test dinners with some coworkers when we were working on Yumpling's menu. You can find it in the resources section. So adding to our menu costs, we're now going to add the cost of testing food. This is an optional step, so it could be as low as $0. And it also really depends on how long you test the food for. So let's put the range on the low end for $200, on the high end $500, which brings our total costs anywhere from $100 on the low end to $1,000 on the high end.